Cheers. All right. Anyway, back to the story.
It's called Story from Last Night. I was in bed watching YouTube on the projector, AirPods in, around 1:30 a.m. Suddenly I hear someone yelling outside. At first I think it's maybe a Dero domestic on the street or in the park. Then I realize it sounds close and they're yelling help. They keep calling help, and I guess I knew it sounded like it's my next door neighbor. I'll call him Pete for the story. It's not his name. From Unit 2, the fellow with the bull terrier. So I take out my AirPods and quickly put on some pants because I'm naked in bed, and I also put on moccasins because I don't wear any shoes to bed. I have bare feet. And I go out front and I see Pete's ute slowly moving backwards. And I see Pete on the back of his ute, still yelling help. My first thought is that he had been working on his car and somehow the brake had released and now it was floating reverse out onto the street. So I imagined I needed to get to the brake. But I was following it out the driveway and I was on the passenger side. It reversed all the way onto the street, and then I looked inside and saw two persons, and I realized it was being stolen. And I remember they were looking back at me. The one in the passenger side was heavy, and I thought Islander. He could have been Indian, but I thought Islander. The guy in the driver's seat was a skinny white guy. I thought he had a punkish hairstyle, parts shaved, parts long. The car's windows are heavily tinted and it was night, so I only have flash memory. So then I'm at the front of the ute, grabbing onto the bull bar as though that would prevent it from being driven away. And that worked. Because next thing I knew, the Islander was out of the car and running into the park. While the ute was still... So this is an asterisk because I wrote it. It's not all necessarily in order. While the ute was still backing out of the driveway, Pete was yelling, "Call the cops." And I realized another resident had come out. This was not his real name, but Tim from Unit 5. So then Pete was in the driver's side of the ute, and Tim was handing me the phone saying, can you talk to the cops? I didn't really see what happened. So I tell them a couple of dudes just tried to steal my neighbor's car, and I answer a few questions, and then I'm talking to Tim, trying to work out what had actually happened. At some point I was on the road looking into the park, and I can see the Islander walking through it, and then down by the roundabout. He crossed the street and headed up towards the main road. He was only walking, wearing black shorts, and I was standing in the road, in the middle of the road, watching him, and he knew I was. I thought about following him, but I was wearing moccasins. I didn't have my phone. I didn't know what had happened to the other guy. It's possible this happened before I spoke to the police on the phone. I don't know. Pete had taken off in his ute, chasing after them, and I saw him turn right, away from the main road. So he went the wrong way. I knew he went the wrong way. He wasn't gone long. His ute returned, and then it was me, Pete, and Tim piecing together what had happened. Pete said he had been awake and heard his ute start up. It's a very loud car. He'd come outside naked and I guess worked out that there were a couple of guys in it. He said he stood in front of it and they pushed the car into him as though to run him over. He punched the window and then jumped onto the back, trying to unlock his bike with the idea of using a handlebar to break the window. That's when he'd started yelling for help. He'd just had his car serviced and had left the spare key in the console with the doors unlocked. How they had opened the
Ah.
electric gate is unclear because there's a gate, right? You need a clicker to open the gate.
Hmm.
Perhaps another neighbor had left the clicker in their unlocked car, which I think is what happened. So then the cops arrived, a man and a woman, and they said they hadn't gotten the full details or they would have been there sooner. It looked like they were going to do a how'd you do, but then they parked and brought in the canine, called them in. So we described the incident to the first responders, and not long afterwards, the cop with the dog came along and set out to trail the Islander dude. We described what we could to the police, and they left. Pete was grateful that Tim and I had come out. Without my presence, they could quite easily have driven off with Pete naked on the back of his ute, and that would not have been good for him. I imagine they would have driven super recklessly to try and throw him off.
Hmm.
Ultimately, we are all lucky that they did not decide to try and drive away, or for some reason were unable to. I was I was holding the bull bar. Pete was on the back. The car the car never moved very quickly, neither backing out nor when on the street. Everything could have been much worse. And I do find it disturbing that only me and Tim came out to investigate a cry for help.
Hmm.
There are 12 apartments in our block, and more apartments either side. Two people is not enough people, and only
Hmm.
I was quick enough to make a difference. Okay, I was awake, and it was happening directly outside my apartment, but I'm confident there were many people who would have heard the cry for help and decided not to. As he said, he was yelling pretty loud.
Hmm.
Now let me blow my own trumpet. I may not have been thinking too clearly, but my presence, my arrival on the scene, my actions, not only saved Pete's ute, but quite likely saved Pete from being seriously hurt. I was the only one who answered the call. Tim answered it too, but slowly and from a greater distance. I may not have realized what was happening, but I rushed out, saw Pete in distress, and ran to his aid. It was a long time before the penny dropped that this was a confrontation with a criminal act, but without me, Pete would have lost. I didn't punch any windows, and I didn't chase after the Islander dude, which I could have done. But I'm still proud of myself. It's still brave to come upon a wild scene and enter into it. I have felt that particularly in a residential area, that if one is attacked or finds oneself in danger, that you can scream for help at the top of your lungs and people will rush to your aid, at least in as much as calling the police, at least perhaps to bear witness. But this incident does give cause to believe that screams and cries for help could well be ignored. That everyone is simply too afraid. Not only didn't get involved, but didn't even look. It's a worry. My confidence in screaming out as a strategy has taken a hit. But it's still the strategy. What other strategy? And it did in fact work for Pete, luckily. I do wonder about these kids. Pete said they were young. I couldn't tell. When did they make the decision to bail? My feeling is they were not on a mission to hurt anybody. They could have run Pete over. They could have hit the gas hard. Maybe they tried and failed. But I never heard the engine get revved. They were backing out slowly, just with a naked man on their back. Maybe once Pete was out and making noise, they were always planning to run. But I still feel they weren't trying to kill anyone. They didn't want to hurt anyone. Without knowing anything about them, I wouldn't prosecute. I'd give them a chance. They were trying to steal a car, that's all. Pete said he was glad he didn't catch up with them because they probably had knives and would stick you. Maybe. But my feeling is not. Pete asked me what I said because it seemed to spook them. I can't remember saying anything. Maybe it was just a topless, long-haired, crazy person at their window, and then on their front they put the heebie-jeebies in them. I'd like to think so. Even better if I said something terrifying, but I don't think I did. I would drink your blood.